I love rock bands, especially the classic ones. That's why I was looking forward to making this video. I have listed the 5 CDs of albums from classic rock bands that I love listening to all the time and are great recordings. These iconic bands have produced these albums that critics have included on their list of greatest albums in the history of rock and roll. In fact, all 5 are on both Rolling Stone's and VH1's greatest albums list. I won't include Dark Side of the Moon and Abbey Road on this list because I already listed them on my other video about my top CDs from VH1's 100 greatest albums, but they will always be included on my list of best rock band albums. The first is The Joshua Tree by U2. This album was released by Island Records in 1987 and the 5th studio album of this Irish band. This album is number 15 on VH1's Greatest Albums list and number 27 on Rolling Stone's Greatest Albums list. The article from Rolling Stone magazine said, on U2's 5th studio album, the band immersed itself in the mythology of United States, while The Edge exploited the poetic echo of digital delay, drowning his trademark arpeggios in rippling tremolo. This album was featured in the book A Brief History of Album Covers. Noted rock photographer Anton Corbijn took the shot, and so doing created one of the most iconic album sleeves, not just for U2, but for the 80s. To be honest, I only bought this album because I loved the track With or Without You, which I often hear on the radio in the late 1980s, but I got exposed to a lot more great songs. I discovered Running to Stand Still, a guitar ballad about heroin addiction. Feel it in your chest as the drums build up towards the chorus and hear Bono playing harmonica towards the end. The first 3 songs of this album are anthemic rock which will make you want to sing along with this band. Hear the shouting on the background during the chorus of the track Trip Through Your Wires. Admire the gentle guitar plucking around the 2-minute mark on the song Mothers of the Disappeared. Next on my list is Who's Next by The Who. Decca Records released this album in 1971 and a lot of critics say this is The Who's best studio album. This album is number 13 on VH1's Greatest Albums list and number 28 on Rolling Stone's Greatest Albums list. According to VH1, guitarist Pete Townshend said it himself, Who's Next in a lot of ways was the perfect record for The Who. It had humor, it had aggression, it had energy, it had color, and it was beautifully recorded. This album was also featured on the book A Brief History of Album Covers. The cover is how they announced their return to balls out rock and roll by choosing an album sleeve that pictured the group having just finished urinating on a giant monolith. The monolith, of course, is commonly linked to the movie 2001 Space Odyssey, which represents overblown extremes of filmmaking. And some people think this is a dig at Led Zeppelin, which in some eyes is the most overblown rock band of them all. This album has a great opening song in Baba O'Reilly, probably a lot of people familiar by now to that synthesizer intro. The songs on this album are open spiked with synthesizers, but observe the piano playing in the track The Song Is Over. Listen intently to the power ballad Getting in Tune. Be amazed with the guitar riffs from acoustic guitars on the track Love Ain't For Keeping. The interplay of guitar and drums on the track Naked Eye should give your hi-fi a good exercise. But most of all, I like Baba O'Reilly because it has my favorite line, I don't have to fight to prove I'm right. Next is Led Zeppelin 2 by Led Zeppelin. Released by Atlantic on 1969 and recorded on the fly while the band was touring. This album is number 43 on VH1's Greatest Albums list and number 79 on Rolling Stone's Greatest Albums list. VH1 author Joe S. Harrington writes, this was a whole new kind of rock. It wasn't about seduction. It was about dominance. Above all, it was about brute force. This album is dripping with machismo and swagger, with many memorable guitar riffs. It opens with one of the most awesome guitar riffs I've heard on the song Whole Lotta Love. Robert Plant's singing on this song exudes arrogance and don't care attitude. Lots of great songs. But my favorite is Thank You, where Plant is singing a love song earnestly, and Jimmy Page's guitar playing is exceptional, and John Bonham's drums sound like they are right in the middle of the band. Other favorite moments: John Bonham's powerful drum solo in Moby Dick. Watch out for Plant playing harmonica on Bring It On Home, and then the song exploding into a hard rock. And that lyrics on the song Ramble On, where Plant says he meets a girl in the darkest depths of Mordor, is so memorable to me. And number 2 is Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones. This album was released by ABKCO in 1969 and one of the greatest Rolling Stones albums. This album is number 24 on VH1's Greatest Albums list and number 32 on Rolling Stone's Greatest Albums list. VH1 author Mimi O'Connor said, "When the Stones dubbed themselves the best band in the world, some may have understandably perceived them as hubristic egomaniacal rock stars. But when you listen to an album like Let It Bleed, it's difficult to disagree." As advised by VH1, and I thoroughly agree, this album should be played loud. But even with all the energy that this album gives out, its production still allows the delicate sounds on the album to shine. Watch out for Mary Clayton, an American soul and gospel singer, as she joins Jagger in singing the opening song Gimme Shelter. With this album, I was able to understand why a lot of people is saying that Keith Richards is one of the best guitar player ever. Listen to him shredding on Let It Bleed and Monkey Man. Also listen to him sing on the track You Got the Silver. This album have my favorite Stone song, You Can't Always Get What You Want. Watch out where it explodes with symphonic choir vocals of London Back Choir. It's the perfect closing song for this album. And the last, but certainly not the least on my recommended classic rock band albums list, is Revolver by the Beatles. This album was released in 1966 by Capitol. This album is highly regarded by critics, being number 1 on VH1's Greatest Albums list and number 3 on Rolling Stone's Greatest Albums list. VH1's author Eric Waibenga writes, "Music changed the day that Revolver was released, forever and for better. There's not many albums you can say that about. If you're lucky enough to come upon it early on your own listening life, it will change you too." A lot of people says this is George Harrison's album because of the noticeable Eastern tonalities, and he shred his guitar throughout this album. This is a very good recording all throughout, as all voices and instruments are crisp. I think this album really defines what a 60s music is and further proof of Lennon and McCartney's superiority in songwriting. Listen to the chamber music accompaniment of Eleanor Rigby. None of the Beatles actually play an instrument on that song. McCartney sings the double-track lead vocal, and Lennon and Harrison contribute harmonies, but the music is performed entirely by a pair of string quartets arranged by George Martin. The song Here, There and Everywhere is one of my most favorite Beatles songs. It is such a poignant, heartfelt love song. Hear that French horn being played by a member of London Philharmonia on the song For No One. Notice how Lennon's voice sounds like he is singing from the mountaintop in Tomorrow Never Knows. And that's my top 5 CDs of albums by classic rock bands. These 5 albums are proof that rock music does not have to be grating and could be pleasing to the ears and can even be inspiring. These albums will give your hi-fi a good workout. I know there is much more albums of rock and roll bands that you should try out and enjoy, but I think these 5 CDs should be at the top of your list as they will be great to hear on a great hi-fi system. As usual, I made this video to hopefully introduce you to great albums you may have missed and have not heard, or just to get you to hear these old favorites with fresh ears. Happy listening!